Welcome to the AppInTop Mobile App Marketing Podcast.
For so many mobile app developers, it's an all-or-nothing battle out there in the App Store.
This AppInTop podcast is your mobile app marketing advantage.
Let's get that new app of yours moving to the top.
This is the AppInTop Mobile App Marketing Podcast.
And now your host, Michael Bauer.
Welcome to this AppInTop Mobile App Marketing Podcast. The podcast is produced by AppInTop.com. You can find the daily blog at blog.appintop.com and also track us down on Facebook.com/AppInTop. And of course, we tweet, so you can find us on Twitter at AppInTop_com. Now, understanding where your app users come from, how they interact with your app, and how much revenue they bring to it are all essential questions. Advertising fraud is an issue that analytics services should be able to detect and help advertisers spend money on real rather than fake users. Many mobile developers work with first-generation systems, but there's a lot of space to improve as the existing systems have significant limitation on functionality. So, we invited Adjust founder Paul Müller to talk, CTO, to talk about the market changes. And Paul, again, congratulations on a big day for you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be there.
Now, on your website, you say that the mobile industry has, at best, provided rubbish in, rubbish out data feedback to advertisers. So I'm going to ask you, what's wrong with the state of mobile analytics today?
Well, that's a pretty general question, but I think the general problem is that many times analytics and specifically attribution and tracking has come over from the online space, where the whole, let's say, web-focused view on how user interacts with a website has been trying to be put over how people interact with apps, and that, simply put, doesn't add up. So we see, for example, a huge demand for cohort analysis, because it's the only way to actually make any sensible assumption on how a user uses your app, because user lifetimes in apps are usually quite long. And taking this attribution over from what's, for example, used for online services doesn't necessarily show you the full picture, or can yield actually results that can be misleading and that lead you to spend money on the wrong kind of users.
So it's sort of the old-fashioned way of doing it isn't working. There's got to be a new standard set in place, and a lot of people are sort of, it's that transition mode. Are we in the midst of that transition mode right now, Paul?
Yes, I think there's a lot of new companies starting with just apps in mind, just like us, for example. I mean, I come from an app publishing background. I've been an app publisher for many years. I've published a couple of apps, raked in a couple of million downloads, so I do have a rough idea what I'm talking about when I say that. We've seen that many of the analytics services coming into the app space from the old school online/web world didn't really understand the new game, while we were basically born in it and had a complete different outlook on how you should see and perceive a user interacting with your application. It starts with simple concepts as there is, for example, no such thing as an install, like in the web world.
Yeah.
And it is still today one of the most central topics in terms of user acquisition that you have to understand and correctly attribute, for example.
Yeah, and with that, let me just, if I may read off your baseball card of stats here. You've developed and published 25 apps, saw 10 million downloads. You personally, from your standpoint, and kind of, having this new view of things in the way analytics is done, give us some examples of where tracking a particular metric and changing your marketing strategy based on that metric made a great impact on your business personally.
So one of the biggest things, specifically in the, let's say, olden days, because even the App Store, the app economy has already gone through a couple of changes.
And Paul, let me ask you, when you say olden days, like how long are we talking about? How many years ago?
I mean, it's 2009, basically.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to check and see how old I was referring back to.
Yeah, I mean, the app economy isn't that old.
Right.
But in 2009, one of the most basic things was, for example, understanding how your app ranked across all the different stores. Because even still today, I mean, back then it was more important, but even still today, it is a very important source to acquire new users is through the App Store. Also a concept completely void that just doesn't exist in the web world. And understanding how users interact with your app in the store and how they actually, find you is a very crucial point. And so one of the things, just to give you an example, one of the things we usually recommend our clients to track is if you're using something like AppIRate or a similar plugin that motivates the user to actually give you a review, if the users are actually doing that. To understand, are my users really liking the app? Are they reviewing me? Are they using it? Another thing which which plays together is, for example, retention. Retention is not just an interesting metric in terms of are my users actually sticking around, but when you're starting out, it is very important to gain a nice foothold in the App Store ranks, as usually the beginning of your life cycle is tremendously important where your app will end up over the long run. So if you're basically failing to make it into the top ranks, your app is pretty much destined to become and stay a zombie app, like these apps that are there but not really downloaded ever.
Right.
And so for Android, retention is one of the very critical metrics that is actually calculated into the ranking of your app. So if people aren't sticking around in your app, you will not rank, no matter how many users you acquire. And understanding that metric is absolute key to understanding how your app can actually improve its ranking and thus gain more, let's say, basically free organic users from within the store.
When we talk about retention, what is it that we're looking at, and what is it that developers can do to sort of improve that element?
I mean, first of all, retention is actually, retention is one of those words that get thrown around a lot.
Of course.
And what we see is that many times the very basic definition of something is very loose. Like if you ask a lot of people what retention means or how it should be defined, you get a very different set of answers. So retention starts with a session, like a user actually opening up the app. And what we can see is that a couple of our competitors, for example, don't really define what a session is. They just take the definition from what the OS is giving you as an app open and take that as a session. The problem is that it's not a very good definition because every push message, every news, everything that basically draws the focus from the app is counted as an app resume, and you count tons of sessions.
Okay.
So our SDK, for example, has a very smart way about this. So it collects all the basic signals it gets and calculates sessions that have, let's say, a minimum distance between each other of 30 minutes, pretty much like a web session. That's one of the definitions that actually made sense, but no one used because it was technically complicated to aggregate sessions like that. So once you actually are clear what a session is, then retention means how many sessions does the user first of all make in a day, and how many days in a row or how many days after the install he will still be around. And we've seen very different techniques to make sure that the users are engaged with the app over a longer term. For many games, it's basically providing content or a lot of content. If you only have a very short game, users only play it for 2 days, of course, they have no reason to stick around for the third day. For many dating apps, we see it is using push notifications to tell the user that there's something new, someone they can date or someone that wants to meet them, and that motivates them to open the app again. It depends pretty much on the vertical that the app is from, but it is definitely one of the key metrics, because if the user isn't in the app, there's no way that he's going to spend money or do anything that you actually want him to do in the app.
And so you guys, it sounds to me like you guys have kind of sort of redefined and adjust a little bit what those parameters are. And I'm imagining that that's one of the advantages of your service compared to places like Mixpanel, Kissmetric, or other paid services. You have a clear definition of what, say, makes up, at least for your definition, retention. I understand that you've attempted to address all user needs within your product. What is one of the other advantages that you guys have?
I think just stepping back a little, the focus of our product, like what we actually want to achieve. Because when we set out to do this, I still come from the point of a publisher that basically just wants to get the job done, to actually build apps that people use and engage in. And everything else is just basically noise in my typical day as a publisher. So what I want is one product where I can see, first of all, how's my app doing in the App Store economy as a whole? So that means App Store statistics. Then I want to know how my attribution is actually running, like how many installs, re-attributions, re-engagements did I basically acquire today, and how did they work out, which is the analytics/product part, to understand those users that are now in my app, what they're actually doing. Because it is one thing, first of all, you need to understand where the user is coming from, what they're doing in the app, but it's of course also important to understand if your app in general is even able, let's say, to break even with your marketing. You could easily see in our product, for example, that your organic users are no way returning near the lifetime value that you would need to be able to acquire new users. And to answer the questions of basically the marketing guy and the product guy in one platform, that is pretty much our goal. The other thing is that I think is very important, specifically when we talk about attribution tracking, is that we're completely independent, which means we don't sell media. We don't have any agreements to ever touch media budget, because we believe that creates a severe conflict of interest when actually having to evaluate where a user comes from, if we would be incentivized to lie about that.
Yeah, if you might weigh a little extra heavy on who's paying you that month, it would be a different kind of set of returns on those analytics. With that, and this is a question that I just have, it sounds to me like you guys are kind of, as far as your target users, you have a wide variety. There's a lot of range going on there. Are you seeing anything that focuses, as far as your clients go, specifically on small, mid-size, or larger companies? Are they all across the board?
It's actually quite interesting, because when we started out, we had a very clear enterprise level goal. So all our direct sales are concerned with big to enterprise level clients, and we have quite a lot of those in Germany. We have pretty much every huge enterprise is exclusively working with us. But what we figured when building the platform, because we're extremely obsessed with simplicity and absolute, only displaying the functionality that is needed within a single view, we figured that we had built a dashboard that was quite easy to build. So we, more as a little experiment, opened a self-sign up for a long tail. And ever since then, we had hundreds of smaller clients signing up to the product without ever basically getting in touch with us. We have everything automated away. And the big enterprise clients were a really good sparring partner to figure out how to write a documentation that actually answers all the questions. Not to have a huge pile of knowledge base, basically, where a user would have to search through the question, because I believe that is already a flawed approach. If you have to write it into a knowledge base, your design of the interface is not optimal, which means that you have to go back and actually change what the interface does, how it looks like, how the user can do what he wants to do, so they can do it without looking it up. And we've always done that, and we're constantly iterating over the process. And due to that, we actually build a product that is now used by hundreds of small clients that we don't actually have to actively interact with to use the product.
Gotcha. Now, with that, let's take a look at it from the perspective of, say, a developer, a small time, kind of just starting out. What is your conversation with them? I mean, it sounds to me, from my aspect, it sounds to me like you guys do a lot of work. You've kind of redefined some of the lines in regards to the analytics, and more importantly, for a young developer, it seems like taking a look at the lifetime of the user is going to be pretty key. But from your standpoint, is it worth a young new developer starting off with Adjust, or would the free basic analytics be sufficient? Or does that lead them in the wrong direction to do something along those lines?
That's a very interesting question, because just today I had a couple of very interesting talks with some bigger, or let's say more experienced UA guys that have split off from the big traditional, or let's say traditional app publishers, and are starting out their own little shops. And the first thing they put in is tracking. That's the first thing. Is that right? As soon as the app is ready. They do not release any version, even the test versions, without proper tracking in the app, because they understand that specifically if we're talking about this whole free-to-play stuff, this is a metrics-based game. If you don't know the metrics or the KPIs of your app from day one, you don't even have to bother trying. Of course, they're the Flappy Birds of the world, and everyone wants to win the app lottery by just building that one smash hit. But for the rest of them, it's hard work, and this hard work has to be measurable and based upon something. And you have to basically start tracking the earliest version of your app to actually see the new version improve this and that KPI. You basically have to go through a set of KPIs that you want to optimize, bring the version to the KPIs that you like, then release it to a bigger market, see how that is doing, and then start doing marketing based on those KPIs and constantly monitor lifetime values, RPU, ARPDAUs, conversion rates for certain events, the K factor, the highly famous virality of your product is a measurable thing. And we can see that those things are super important from day one, no matter how big or small you are.
So whatever your budget is, make sure that that's something you're including into day one from the very, very beginning. That's one of the first parts of the budget that needs to be clearly defined going forward. Now, Paul, we're talking with Paul Müller, CTO of Adjust. This is a big question, but I just kind of want you to give me your opinion on a relatively simple answer. There are a lot of companies out there. Not a lot of them are offering anti-fraud solutions. Either how do you guys prevent fraud, or what do you think is the answer to helping prevent fraud?
I wish there would be an easy answer to that.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is, our main clientele are usually publishers, but we have a lot of networks and partners actually approaching us, using or trying to work with us to battle the fraud, because it is first of all their problem, because when they're selling fraud, they get a certain image that they don't want.
Yeah.
And it starts at simple things. For example, our SDK does a little bit more complex mechanics, or runs a bit more complex code in the app, so it is slightly harder to fake it. So you actually have to simulate the app. That may sound simple, and we still see a lot of simulated installs. But let's say for many other tracking providers, you can just manipulate the HTTP API and just use that, and it costs you nothing. You don't have to do anything. For us, we would pretty easy recognize a non-real device that is trying to fake the interaction from our SDK. So that is one very simple thing. The other thing is that due to the things that we actually do in the app and what we track, we have a lot of plausibility things that we can run and check. It starts at simple things. I mean, of course, there's this, let's say, the good old traditional IP checking against, is it coming from any basically known data centers or clouds? Like, is it AWS? Is it Google App Engine? Is it the Azure from Microsoft? These are simple things, but we also enable them to do more complex things. Like what we figured, many scammers that simulate installs on some kind of data center, of course, use proxies or VPNs to tunnel out into the target country. What they don't usually think about is, just to give you one example, not to give away all the little tricks to figure out.
Right.
But they usually forget to set like the local clock. So you have like let's say German device that has a Chinese time zone. That never occurs in the wild. Like, there is zero chance, because every Android device is set automatically. There's zero chance of that actually happening for real. And this is one of many actual simple plausibility checks that many fraudsters fail. And I think it's impossible to completely prevent fraud, because it's a cat and mouse game. But what you can always do is to at least make it that hard that it may not be profitable anymore. And I think that what fraud detection should be about, is like putting the bar so high that it becomes very hard. I mean, the other thing, which we are currently seeing a lot of our publishers that have their own affiliate networks. We are working with a lot of dating clients. One of them is running a huge affiliate network for themselves. And what they're looking at is simply the retention, because that is something that is very hard to fake, because you'd have to simulate the device for days on end, and simulating tens of thousands of devices days on end actually ends up costing you a lot of money, and that becomes unprofitable when you're only paid so much for a certain event happening inside the app.
Gotcha.
And they just check what is the 3-day retention or 7-day retention. It's usually 0 for faked installs. And that is one of the metrics they use, for example.
First of all, I like that. I wish that there were more web people taking advantage of those same kinds of theories and ideas. But what I want to find out in just a second, we're going to take a quick break here, Paul. When we come back, how Adjust does the voodoo that they do, and what is their most important feature separating them from the pack in regards to what their users believe. That's in seconds here on the AppInTop podcast.
This podcast is produced with support from AppInTop, an automated mobile app marketing platform in App Store and Google Play.
This is the AppInTop Mobile App Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Bauer. Adjust is a mobile app tracking and analytics company based in Berlin and San Francisco, and provides app businesses with a comprehensive business intelligence platform. As an official Facebook mobile measurement partner, Adjust is integrated with over 200 other major networks worldwide. One of their founders is joining us here today. And again, I will congratulate you on his wedding day. On his wedding day, he's joining us here at the podcast. Please welcome CTO Paul Müller. Now, we're talking about market changes. And Paul, we talked earlier about what needs to change. So let's talk about what you guys have done so far. For your users, what is the most important feature that your users are using on a daily basis right now?
I think there's basically two sets of, let's say, quotation mark features that we provide. And they come all from the basic assumption that we look at the problem that they have from their point of view. So many of our competitors come from, an ad network saying, hey, we should also do this attribution thing, or hey, we provided online analytics, why not provide these app people with analytics as well? Well, we usually just sit there like, hey, I'm an app publisher and I have this problem, how can I solve it? And it's not with, let's say, simple things that we are privacy certified. Being a German company, we adhere to all the German privacy laws. That means that we have to be able to tell you where the data is stored, what do we actually store, how do we store it, who has access to it, and a simple thing, how does it go from the SDK to the server? We only and exclusively use SSL encryption for that. Stunningly enough, that is not standard in the industry. Like most data from apps is actually sent clear text to tracking partners, which I personally find completely unacceptable. And basically coming from that point of view, many of the things that we've built in, like being able to forward and share the data with the client in real time with their own BI system, because it's their data that we're managing them, gives us a lot of, let's say, street cred with the developers that are actually syncing the same way, which we can constantly see that they basically come onto this problem that we basically faced when we built the company, and they're very happy that we simplified things. Let's say campaign setup. Again, maybe a small thing, but setting up a campaign with us and let's say Facebook. Let's say you want to run a Facebook re-engagement campaign. That's like 3 clicks, putting in one number and hitting save. With our competitors, it takes you 10 times as long. Setting up a campaign with any of the 200 plus networks that we've integrated, it's pretty much entering any arbitrary name of what you want to call this network, and giving a very short URL, I mean like something like 20 digits to that company. Well, with our competitors, that's selecting that specific network, entering a couple of magic numbers, having a huge 3-line URL, copy pasting it in, breaking, because that's what happens when we have a very, very long URL. And those things just cost you time as a publisher. So the things that we basically do to get out of the way of the publisher are one of our biggest advantages and features. Same goes for our open source SDK. If it compiles with your app, you don't have to worry about what platform it'll crash on, because when you get a compiled library, there's a good chance it hasn't been compiled with the same settings. It may crash on old iPods, something like that. I've been there. Like I had hundreds of angry reviews because some SDK was crashing on some old iPods. Would never happen with the open source SDK because you get to compile it. You also get to see what it does. So if there is a problem, you don't have to get back to us to tell us like, hey, there's something weird in that black box you gave us. You can say, hey, in line 25, you guys, made kind of a stupid mistake. And, either we have that sometimes that even the clients just go on GitHub where our SDK is actually hosted, make a pull request, say like, hey guys, if you write it like that, it's actually a bit nicer. And we, incorporate it into the next version of the SDK. So they can transparently work with the developer. And again, it saves so much time from the point of view of a client to be able to interact directly with our developers through GitHub, for example. And it basically just all adds up to this whole package where we focus on actually letting the publisher get their job done and getting out of the way.
Yeah, it sounds like the efficiency level is absolutely amazing with what you guys do there. Let's talk about the metrics as well. So how do you guys calculate the key metrics such as return rate, lifetime value? Do you guys have your own analytics know-how?
Sure. My developer team and me actually come from a let's say, more old school background, so it's not all in the cloud, no SQL stuff.
Gotcha.
With a good old Postgres, C functions, that's more kind of the thing we do. And based on that technology, we have actually built a very sophisticated cohort analysis. That means that we group together all the users that come into the segments that are segmented in by the traffic source, country, device, whatever. And then go and continuously measure and update the metrics of each cohort. So we have hundreds of basically different kind of slice and diceable dimensions in our cohorts that we have built a specific query logic to be able to answer the questions from the dashboard in real time. And that technology is actually used to calculate all kinds of metrics that are usually derivatives of some absolute numbers. For example, your lifetime value is basically the total revenue created by that cohort divided by the total number of users in that cohort. And basically all the metrics are coming as a derivative either from an absolute number or from another relative number. And so what we do is basically track all the, let's say, absolute counters segmented. So we have millions and millions of different kind of counters that are incremented every day with the incoming traffic. And then we have a very specific query logic that can calculate all those metrics from those numbers.
So, and it sounds like with the communication that you guys usually have with your clients, that you can make some suggestions, some recommendations based upon the cohort analysis. I mean, can an app developer establish what marketing channels will work for them based upon that information?
Sure. I mean, these are basically two questions. So first of all, that's the main purpose of the cohort analysis, to tell you what channel works the best. Of course, as we go forward, we will enable you to also, for example, understand how different app versions work and measure that. But currently, we're focused on being able to tell you, let's say, if your Facebook campaign outdoes your Chartboost campaign, or what of your Facebook ad groups work the best, or, what of your millennial campaign creators perform the best, or what generate the most engaged users. And as for actually making suggestions on how we do things, the whole product as it is today was pretty much developed together with the client. So we didn't sit in our little dark room and build something and just came out and say, ta-da.
Right.
But we started out with clients very, very early on in the process of designing the product. And we were incredibly lucky to get some very experienced people from very big companies to work with us, sit down and say, look, this cohort analysis would be perfect if I would be able to define whatever I want in terms of grouping, segmenting, filtering, and selecting the KPI. And we said, well, okay, that's a very complicated design goal, and we took our sweet time actually building it, but now it's done. And we can see it basically pay off with every new client coming in and saying, well, I can just pick whatever I want to see and get it. I don't have to ask you if you can give me the, let's say, 28-day RPU for this one creative I ran on Facebook, because we enable you to just select that thing. And it's pretty much with all the other features we're currently developing. They've all been requests from clients telling us it would be perfect if you could also do this and that. And this is also a huge guideline for us to actually just check what the client wants to see in the dashboard. What would make their life easier? It's something that we constantly ask them.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic that there's that communication level that you guys have with the clients, in addition to just the mind frame that you took from day one about how we're going to do this with the client in mind, rather than, our stats and pie charts kind of aspect in mind, which I think is rare. I do think that that's rare in today's business. But with that, virality metric, can you evaluate the virality metric? And if so, how do you calculate that in with your other analytics?
Sure. I mean, that's basically two numbers that are interesting. First of all, you have to understand, because the virality, or basically the amount of how many users does each current user generate for you, which is what this metric is saying, is consisting of two parts. First of all, how many times do they actually share it, which is an event you can simply track in your application, which means that, let's say your app suggests to post this to your Facebook wall, or post an image to Instagram, or tweet something. And if the user actually agrees to do that, you should track that and say, hey, I successfully posted a shared tweet. And then the second thing you have to do is to be able to understand the users that are clicking on that tweet, how many of those are actually coming and install your app and they're using it. And we can basically cover both of those sizes. You would just simply tweet one of our URLs, and attach which user actually tweeted that. You'd be able to see in our dashboard not just how many times did my users tweet, and how many did they tweet per person, and how many tweets do they do on average in the first 1 or 2 or 3 weeks, but you would also be able to see how many users did I gain today over this sharing feature, and how many of them came from which users, so you can actually see your most influential users. And maybe you want to go and reward them, because we also give you that information back into the app via the SDK. We call this in-app data access, and you can use that to, let's say, incentivize users. Say like, hey, there's 100 new users because of you, so thank you. Here's let's say 100 gold coins or something.
Right. Now, the curiosity I have in that, there's two things that come to my mind is mobile app campaigns and TV ads, and analytics for pre-installed apps. Let's deal with the mobile app campaigns and TV ads first. How do you guys monitor that?
We're currently working with another Berlin-based company, also a startup, and what they do is to measure TV advertisement in real time using image recognition software. It's pretty cool stuff, and they are willing to share this data with us. So what we're currently doing is testing that a hypothesis that there is a correlation between an advertisement being shown and the number of, let's say, organic installs rising. And as far as we can tell, there's a very, very good connection. It's a very short defined time frame as far as our first tests actually show. And what we'll do is, with that data, And you'll be able to say, I want to track my TV campaigns. Of course, you have to use the service so we can get your API data. But then we'll be able to say, look, there's let's say a normal basis in the next 5 minutes of this spot running, you would usually get, let's say, 10 organic installs. So when suddenly within the spot being shown, there's a huge spike in organic installs, which is what we can see of sometimes, let's say, being 1,000 installs in these 5 minutes, we can pretty safely say that those 1,000 installs actually come from the spot that was just shown. And if we take this attribution, of course, it is not a perfect one-on-one attribution. But the point being that the certainty is still pretty high. Like, we're pretty certain that those users from this country actually came from where the spot was just shown 5 minutes ago. And then you can just do normal standard attribution for this user, and you can do all the analytics you can get from Facebook or whatever partner as well, and that would make your TV ads measurable. Of course, there's still the intangible effect of the long-term effect of TV ads, specifically if you have like bigger brand names like e-commerce clients. But what we can see with like dating or delivery services and all this kind of stuff, that is a very sharp, defined peak right through the time of the spot and the short time after.
Sounds like your research is still being done, but you're at least getting some good ideas as to the theories and the hypothesis. What about analytics of pre-installed apps?
That was, funnily enough, one of the first features that was ever required of us, because we're working with the Deutsche Telekom, and of course they can pre-install stuff. And so what we built into the SDK, I mean it only affects Android as of now, is that you can just build a special APK for distribution that has a hard-coded pre-installed attribution where you say, hey, this APK belongs to this one thing I did with LG where I pre-installed my app on their phones, and you'll be able to see those users actually opening and installing the app, or opening it for the first time in our dashboard, and see how big is actually the effect of those pre-installed campaigns and what kind of users you're actually gaining from it.
Gotcha. So from the get-go, you guys had done some work with that.
Yes, again, it was, I think, in one of the first 4 or 5 SDK versions we built, because it was a very required feature. And we have a lot of users actually using it, specifically in the Asian market. Is a pretty standard strategy for many app publishers to be pre-installed on a lot of different handsets. And basically in the same kind of term, we also allow all kinds of different stores. Like, we don't have a requirement for a certain store to deliver the APK in terms of Android apps. You can basically host the APK on your own server and distribute it, and our tracking will just be fine.
You're listening to Paul Müller, CTO of Adjust here, who's letting us know the details on what needs to change, what needs to move going forward. Paul, I'm going to ask you to track down, while we're taking a break here, your crystal ball someplace in the office there, because we're going to get to that in just a second. Also, fraud is a big problem facing developers and analytic companies, but there's one problem that's bigger and needs to be addressed. What it is, and is there anything that can be done to remedy that? That's coming up in seconds here on the AppInTop podcast.
This podcast is produced with support from AppInTop, an automated mobile app marketing platform in App Store and Google Play.
This indeed is the AppInTop mobile app marketing podcast. I'm Michael Bauer, your host. We would definitely like to hear from you, so please send us your comments via Facebook at facebook.com/AppInTop, or you can tweet us any and all of your questions, comments, and thoughts at AppInTop_com. That's AppInTop_com. Adjust delivers app analytics to the world's largest advertising and media agencies, and one of their founders, recently married Paul Müller, CTO, joins us here at the AppInTop podcast. There's a problem that's even bigger than fraud. Losses on the tracker side that can be between 20 and 50%. In your mind, Paul, is there a solution for this problem? And if so, what is it?
Yes, I mean, this problem basically segments into 2 scenarios. One of the scenarios being something we can see specifically in Android applications, that the user downloads the application, or let's say the store counts the download, but the user either never opens it or opens the app and doesn't give the app the proper rights to, for example, be able to access the internet. That happens a lot with apps that have, let's say, very big demands in terms of what they want to be able to do on your phone. And as the user just rejects it, you will never get any idea of why the user wouldn't turn on the app. that is one of the things that we are able, or we will be able to see once we are also getting the store reports, which is currently on our roadmap, and then give you an alert when we see a very high discrepancy between the number of downloads to store reports and the number of installs we can actually see. So we will be able to tell you if there's a too big gap to be, let's say, normal. The other thing, and that is percentage-wise the far bigger chunk, and that is something we figured in our second SDK version, is that the state of being online on a mobile device is far more fragile than one would actually assume. So our first SDK had a very naive strategy of trying to connect to the server. It just basically tried to build an HTTP connection. If that failed, it did one retry, waited a little bit, had a very long timeout. It was actually a timeout of, I think, 1 or 2 minutes. And we still could get a lot of complaints from users saying, like, there is too little data, this can't add up. And so what we did is we built an offline capability into the SDK. So what the SDK does is when something happens, a session or an event or whatever, it writes it into an offline queue and then has a separate service that tries to connect to our server with a logarithmic backup logic. So it tries, first every couple of seconds and then in longer periods. And when it can finally reach the server, it transmits everything that has happened since it has seen the server last. And the server is basically acknowledging, like, okay, I got this one session, I got a couple of events, and then it is removed from the queue. This little change in the SDK led to tremendous increase in terms of what we could see in sessions and events. For some of our publishing clients, like classical magazine publishers, and we work together with the biggest newspaper publishers in Germany. And we could see that for many of their apps, the increase of sessions and events was up to 30%, which means 30% of the time the users weren't online. And not online on the mobile device in that case actually doesn't mean that they have turned off, turned the device to flight mode. It means that they've just switched between 3G and Edge, which can regularly lead to data loss. Or they even switched from 3G to Wi-Fi, which interestingly enough also leads to a short gap that many standard, or let's say naive, tries to connect to a service would just drop the connection. And so we could figure that once you remove the component of actually the tracking being dependent on the internet connection, you can get most of those gaps actually covered.
So it's sort of tracking despite connectivity issues.
Yes, that was our biggest feature for our SDK version 2. I mean, we're now going towards version 4, but that was one of the things that surprised us, even me, like being in the space for such a long time. I was really surprised to see that the internet connectivity is so, let's say, wonky. Another thing, what we've seen, and just yesterday we had an internal meeting about that, is that connections coming from mobile phones are really, let's say, hard to standardize in terms of what normal, let's say, internet load balancers, or when you get your standard Amazon EBS load balancer instance, what they are used to handle. Because we had to tweak and tune the hardware load balancers. We have quite a lot to be able to get the full picture of all of the connections, specifically the slower ones, from not Western Europe, but like India and China. We could see a lot of the connections actually coming in extremely slow, extremely high package loss. Like package losses up to 20% are normal there. And you have to really be able to fine tune your kernel or your settings in your load balancer to be able to still get this data from there. Many standard cloud services would just discard these connections because they're practically speaking broken, but you still want the data from those devices. And so also this data is obtainable once you figure out how to actually play around with all the settings to be able to get those slow and broken TCP connections to actually work.
Now, Paul, before we get to the crystal ball question I've got for you, let's get into fraud from an advertiser's side. If a specifically designed script hides every second install, how can ad networks fight that problem?
Yeah, okay, that's also depends a bit on how sophisticated you're trying to hide it.
Okay.
The standard thing is that we, for example, as I said, the SDK does a lot of offline tracking. So if you just disable the sending for every second thing, that wouldn't work because we would still see that there was something happening. Or if you constantly turn off the SDK, you have the problem that you don't have any tracking. So far we haven't seen a single publisher actually doing this because they are interested in the data. And the good thing for the networks actually is that if they work with us, they know that they get the full data set that the publisher also sees, which when, let's say, you use an SDK from the network, you're far more incentivized to actually trick that because you don't have any drawback. If, let's say, you use something like the Tapjoy SDK and you would try to disable it purposely, you don't necessarily have a negative effect besides paying less to Tapjoy. If you would use our SDK and try to hide away certain users from us, you would also have the problem that you don't see those users, which would be basically the opposite goal of what you wanted to do with the marketing tracking in the first place. So with using a third-party independent tracking company, the networks can actually be sure that they get the same data set as the publisher, contrary to when they try to push their own SDKs, which still till a while ago was still one of the things they constantly tried.
Paul, I've only got two more questions, and I swear you can get back to your wedding day. But some developers are really paranoid, and it sounds like you guys do a lot of research. You've got a lot of numbers. You're watching constant information coming to you. But some developers are paranoid that in regards to the tracker, that data safety might be a concern. What do you say to clients like that?
That's actually my favorite question, because that would be my first question. Like, what the hell are you guys doing with the data? Where's it going?
Right, exactly.
What's happening with that? And it always stunned me how little our industry answers that question, and how many times you just get blanks there, specifically from our dear American competitors, which, the word privacy or data integrity doesn't really mean anything to them. It's what we've seen in our experience. So what I say to them is like, look, I could tell you that our SDK is privacy compliant, has been audited, and so on. But I'd suggest that if you're a developer, you just go to github.com/adjust, check out our SDKs and see what they do for yourself. Because I don't have to promise you that it doesn't do anything creepy. I can prove to you. You just go there and you read what it does. You'll see that all the data being sent to our data center in Germany is SSL encrypted. So first off, we take care of the biggest pain. You don't want to be on VentureBeat first page being the guy that sends around all the user data, clear text like the IME that everyone at Starbucks could read because your SDK is sending it around. You don't want to be that guy with that headline. So we prevent that, A, by not collecting such a sensitive information, and B, by making sure everything is encrypted. Second thing is that I can actually tell you where your data is, like geographically, and I can tell you exactly a list of people who has access to that data. And if you have all your data in the cloud, specifically given recent developments, we all know that that doesn't necessarily mean that you know who has access to your data. If you put your stuff into the cloud, it could be pretty much accessed by anyone without you ever noticing. For us, that was completely unacceptable when designing the company, or designing the basic values of the company. One of the things was that this data belongs to our publishers and not to us. So we will only monetize on what the publisher is paying us for the tracking and not on the data. That is also why we have no free package, because there's no realistic way to provide a service for free without trying to monetize it through the backdoor somehow.
Correct.
And that's why we say there is a minimum fee. It is not high. It's 100 euros, but this guarantees that this is your data, and we take care of it with really great care. And we are being audited by many of our German enterprise clients regularly, which means I many times have something like 10 lawyers coming in and walking them exactly through the technology.
Right.
Where's the data stored? What is stored? How do we use it? How do we share it? And how do we make sure that no one else has access to it? And I think we've taken by far the biggest care about this, because it actually concerns us as something that we feel very strongly about.
Paul, last question I've got for you here on your wedding day. I want you to look at that crystal ball. Perhaps it was given as a gift. Maybe you're going to return it as soon as we're done this conversation. I don't know. What do you see as the number one biggest change that's going to be happening real shortly here in the future of mobile analytics?
I think the biggest problem we see is one of the things I mentioned earlier. There's a lot of fragmentation going on. So you have all kinds of services trying to solve all kinds of very specialized problems, but at the end of the day, the publisher sits there and has to log in and out of like 4 or 5 different dashboards and has to try to make sense of the data. And many times the real story behind the data is getting lost due to the fact that they're in different silos that are not sharing the data with each other. So what I see is that, first of all, the analytics will move more towards a platform approach, so that there's one, let's say, basic source for the data. Maybe there's specialized providers on top of that, but there's like one platform that gives you the bigger picture, that tells you, hey, these are your reports coming from the store, that's your rankings in the store, this is the data we've collected from your app, and that is the story in between those numbers. Like, this happens when you lay those next to each other in a comparable space. and actually provide something that can give you that information in a quick and really efficient way, and just, again, get out of your way to actually do your job and build your app, and not just, obsess about how to figure out what it is doing in there. And this, I think, is the next big thing in terms of where analytics is going, to actually provide a lean, comprehensive overview of all of the aspects of your app.
Instead of what we talked about earlier, the garbage in, garbage out, it's an easy in, easy out kind of a concept.
Yes.
Gotcha. Paul, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. I appreciate you letting us pick your mind for the past 40 minutes, sir.
Oh, my pleasure.
All right. And for all of you listening, thank you very much. This has been the AppInTop Mobile App Marketing Podcast. Make sure you visit our daily blog, blog.appintop.com, where you can find all this great information and much, much more every single day. Until next time, I'm Mike Bauer. See ya.
This podcast is produced with support from AppInTop, an automated mobile app marketing platform in App Store and Google Play. The AppInTop Mobile App Marketing Podcast is produced by
AppInTop.com.